I'm Liz. I'm an artist and a researcher, and I'm working mostly in printmaking and sound. I'm doing a practice-based PhD at the Royal College of Art, like Melanie said, in which I'm investigating, just to recap, how listening to the sounds made by trees might reconnect humans to the forest, and how the combination of both audio and visual can be used to enhance that connection. So I use listening as a method for re-engagement with the woodland environment, as well as field recording to gather sounds made by trees. And I'll often explore inaudible or unnoticed sounds made by trees, things like transpiration or decomposition or water saturation. And I analyze these field recordings through sound visualization in an attempt to reveal the hidden and unnoticed sonic depths of the sylvan forest. And the resulting audiovisual artworks are used to provide audiences with alternative ways of engaging with trees and alternative perspectives of trees. And the hope is that this then creates a space for further discussion about the importance of forests in this fragile time of climate and ecological breakdown. So in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about how listening to the forest and its sounds has led me to think about the notion of vibrant matter, and to visualizing one of my forest sound recordings using the photographic cyanotype process. I'm going to play you a field recording first. And the field recording offers an alternative perspective through which to consider the sound of a rainstorm. I'll play the recording first, sort of let it breathe for a moment, and then I'll start sort of talking alongside it. It's actually best listened to with headphones, but if you don't have them, don't worry, it'll be slightly more tinny from a computer speakers, but I did want to offer a sample of the sound in the presentation.
Liz, I don't think we can hear it from our side.
Thanks, Mel. I'll just correct that. Hold on a sec. How's that?
Perfect.
Great. So this soundscape is an audio record of the first rain in months hitting the dry forest earth floor during the 2018 summer heatwave. It was in the Forest of Mar in the Scottish Cairngorms. And the recording reveals the perspective of a rainstorm that humans don't normally experience. The hidden depths of the soundscape are accessed by recording the rainstorm from beneath the forest floor. The audio experience surrounds the listener with sounds of raindrops vibrating sort of with and against the dry earth particles. And it reveals materials in different states, liquid water and solid earth smashing and colliding together. The recording was gathered by burying two hydrophones. These are microphones that can be submerged in water just underneath the surface of the earth, with the rain hitting them from above. that's the end of the sample. So because the audio perspective is from within the ground, I'm thinking perhaps it shouldn't be rain on dry earth, but instead it might be called rain in dry earth. And this shift alters the sensorial perspective from above ground, the anthropocentric position, to the below ground, non-human position that potentially a worm or a tree root might experience. I obviously don't attempt to know how a worm or a root senses the sound of rain, but the hope is that the field recording enables imagination of the experience of a rainstorm from a non-human perspective. So the experience of listening to rainstorms from this perspective revealed the materials and processes that shaped that particular sound event in the Forest of Marr. And this led me to research further the idea of multiple active agents that can affect a location or environment. So in Jane Bennett's book, Vibrant Matter, A Political Ecology of Things, she states her ambition is to encourage more intelligent and sustainable engagements with vibrant matter and lively things. She draws on Bruno Latour's term actant, which describes a human or non-human source of action that has efficacy, can do things, has sufficient coherence to make a difference, produce effects, and alter the course of events. So these multiple actants can be heard in the recording, the rain and the earth combining to produce the soundscape, each actant providing an essential role in the functioning of the landscape. The rain providing life-sustaining moisture, and the earth providing a nourishing foundation from which plant and tree life can grow. And I want to very briefly touch on some ecosystem science, just to put in context some of this work. So within forestry science, there's a term called ecosystem services. And this is all about how the multiple life-giving benefits that a forest landscape can provide. So we have the supporting services, which are photosynthesis, pollination, soil formation, and nutrient recycling. We've got the provisioning services, supplies of timber, drinking water, and food. And we've got the regulating services, carbon sequestration, water purification, groundwater recharge, flood protection, climate regulation. And the term ecosystem services is used all the time in forestry and ecology as to what the forest can and does provide for us. So following Bennett's notion of vibrant matter, lively bodies, actants that affect change, I suggest that the forest and all of its multiple parts shouldn't be considered static and inanimate matter in service to humans, but instead that its multiple active agents are active forces capable of affecting change and altering the course of the flourishing of life, both human and non-human. So my perspective of new materialism, as you can gather, is hugely informed by Jane Bennett's Vibrant Matter. Developing an awareness of the agency of non-human beings and our ecological relationships with them is explored in depth by Bennett. In Vibrant Matter, she attributes humanity's ecological destructiveness to a deficiency in our perception of the non-human. And she argues that a truly ecologically enlightened perspective needs us to become more attuned to the agency of vibrant matter and our ecological interconnectedness with it. So Bennett actually doesn't ever use sound as an example in Vibrant Matter, but I would argue that sound itself is particles vibrating together in order to create audible frequencies, and that sound should certainly be considered an active agent of vibrant matter. So moving back to the artwork, the field recording that you heard, I analysed that using a digital rendering of a sound called a spectrogram. So if anyone's not come across this before, in this format, you've got time running along the horizontal axis and frequency or pitch running up the vertical axis there of the image. And I combined the spectrogram image with of my rainstorm recording with textures that visually echo the patterns of rain on a window pane. And it was at this stage that I started experimenting with cyanotypes. I'm actually new to this process as a printmaker. This is my first step into something more photographic. And I came to it for two reasons. The first, as I'm sure many of you already know, the cyanotype process was originally used by engineers and architects for reproducing diagrams and drawings in the form of blueprints. And the second reason, again, I'm sure you know already, Anna Atkins first used the process to document her ferns and seaweed in her collection of botanical specimens. So both of these uses link back to my work and this project, both translating information into diagrams and investigating forest flora. So what spectrograms are, they're good at breaking down frequency or pitch and really investigating that element of sound, but they're not great for volume. They do it with a color range, and I wasn't quite satisfied with that. So I divided the spectrogram up into different decibel volume ranges, and you can see here these drawings. We've got the loudest in the top left, medium, top right, quieter, bottom left, and quietest, bottom right. And in cyanotype prints, that's the loudest, slightly quieter, medium, and the faintest. And it just so happens that in this recording, the loud raindrops that landed close to the microphone were really low in pitch, really low in frequency. And as you travel to the really quiet raindrops, which were quite far from the microphone or quite small, the frequency or the pitch raised to a much higher hertz level. So the combination of the rainstorm field recording and the cyanotype prints developed into the audiovisual installation Forest Listening. The soundscape would change when heard in different sites, different exhibition locations. So I also needed the visual element of the installation to be site responsive as well. The cyanotypes were remade as outdoor hanging canvas banners. So they could be hung in different locations, different forest locations. And each banner is a slice of those cyanotypes enlarged to the height of a person. And taking slices from the cyanotypes, it meant that the artwork could be installed in response to each exhibition location. The sliced up fragments enable a constantly changing, evolving installation, which for me reflected how sound is never static, but always changing and taking up space. So last August, the banners were hung in Blackheath Forest, which is just east of Guildford in Surrey. And this is the image that we're looking at now. So the lowest canopy branches of this Scots pine tree, people visiting the forest could walk amongst the installation, listening to the recording of the rain which played from speakers, with the visuals surrounding them. The forest listing was also exhibited at Ecological Sense, which was a show at the Hockney Gallery, hosted by the Sustain Lab at the Royal College of Art in their Kensington site. And this was in March this year, right before lockdown. So I was one of, it was one of 11 artworks selected for the exhibition that critiqued and reflected on, this is a quote, current attitudes to materials, modes of production, and the fundamental relationships that humans have with the natural environment, end quote. So the Hockney Gallery, as you can see, it's really spacious. It's got a quite high ceiling, which allowed the banners to be raised above the head height of any visitor which came to the gallery. And by playing with the position of the banners, I intended the perspective of the audience to be shifted to below the imagery, inviting everyone to sort of look up to see the artwork. And this echoed the position of the audio recording, which was gathered from below the ground. And this altering of position was an attempt to move away from the anthropocentric view of the human as dominant or central. I was invited to exhibit forest listening at Unearthing Landscapes, which was a symposium exploring how the arts can enable a deeper understanding, knowledge and connection to landscape. And this was at the University for Creative Arts in Farnham in Surrey. It was in October last year. And here forest listening was installed outside in a university courtyard. The canvas banners were hung from a maple tree. It was an ancient, really majestic maple tree, and the only living greenery in the courtyard. And the sound element was played from speakers which lined this open air space. And in fact, this courtyard was actually a really difficult space to show the work, as it wasn't normally used as an exhibition space. It was much more of a thoroughfare with students socializing and eating and advertising, student union activities. And there were also the delegates all moving between the symposium and lecture theatres. So the courtyard was bustling with noise and activity. And the fact that the space was such a thoroughfare created this disconnect between the sound and the visuals, with the effect that the visuals no longer supported the listening experience. The two events became quite separated. Having to compete with multiple other noises meant that the audio element of the installation was actually lost. However, the visuals stepped up and created quite a lot of curiosity, with people far more attention to this single tree in the courtyard as a result of the banners and the information provided about the project. And as a really quick side note on this, I returned to UCA Farnham in March this year to find that this maple tree had actually been cut down, something to do with the plumbing. And I realised I'd actually grown really fond of it during my time installing the work, and I really felt its loss. And talking to staff and students that day, they all really felt its loss as well. I felt like I couldn't talk about that project and not mention that the trees are no longer there. So the final installation site that I'll show with this project is where it's being shown now. It's in the Limnasslease woodland at the Watts Artist Village, which is near Guildford in Surrey. And in this location, we've gone for a much more personal listening experience. Here, the Rainstorm soundscape can be downloaded and listened to via either the Surrey Hills Arts website or the Watts Gallery website. This was actually put in place because of COVID-19 restrictions. But what it's meant is that visitors can go on their own listening journey in the woodland. For this installation in Limbless Lease Woodland, we spread the banners throughout quite an untrodden area of the woodland, with the intention that people would come across it and it might emerge like hidden gems from among the trees. So I'll finish there, and just as a final note, the progression of the project has really helped me think through some of the ideas of new materialism, particularly Jane Bennett's notion of vibrant matter. The project also introduced me to cyanotype printing, so I'm really excited to hear some of the other talks that are happening this evening, because I'm quite interested in ways to make my art practice more ecologically mindful. So I'm keen to hear the other artists speak this evening about how this cyanotype process might be done more sustainably. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Liz. We have one question from Ali Newton, who says, "Hi, I love the movement in them. How did you make them into cyanotypes?"
I wonder if might Ali be able to expand on that?
Ali, would you like to speak? If not, just say no in the chat.
Hiya. Yeah, it was just sort of the process from the sound graphs, or I have no knowledge of what, so just how that then became a cyanotype, just how you transferred that image and made it into a cyanotype, just briefly. Or...
Oh, sure. I'll just to do that, I'll really quickly go back to screen share just so I can show the slides again, because it might make a little bit more sense. So perhaps I kind of, to keep the talk to a tidy 20 minutes, I perhaps went a bit quickly over this. I wanted to specifically analyze the pitch, or pitch is the musical term, and frequency is the kind of I guess sonic term, the sound term for how high the note or the sound is, and I took a tracing of this spectrogram that you can see here, and overlaid it with, I traced it 4 times. First, the bright yellow bits to get this tracing. Then pink was a slightly lower volume range, slightly lower decibel. Then lighter again was this range, and then super light, I'll just check the color on that. Yeah, it was almost going into a sort of purpley, is this higher frequency or pitch. So all of those drawings became acetates. I printed them out onto acetate and then exposed them to the cyanotype developing fluid. So painted the paper with the developing fluid, but each color is, so this was developed for a lot longer, getting that really dark blue. much less. And then this was developed for hardly any time at all, which is why it's so light. And it was an experiment to see if I could play with not only pitch of the sound, but also volume, which I felt like that spectrogram didn't show well enough at all. I hope that a little bit more in-depth answers your question. Thank you for asking it.
Yeah, that was really interesting. We have another question from Anna Goodchild, who said, what do visitors think to your woodland exhibition feel about the banners tying the trees down?
That's actually a really great question. I wonder if perhaps it's about, you're asking it about almost like the safety of the trees, and ensuring that they're okay during the install. To be honest, all the visitors that I've spoken to, both in Blackheath and then in Limneslease, none of them talk to me about the safety of the trees. And I wonder if it's because when you're there, when you see it, the ropes and the banners are actually, they're super light. They're quite a fine canvas fabric. So the boughs they're never pulled by it. Then the ropes never mark them, and when the thin ropes are sort of cut off at the end, there's nothing left on the tree. So I absolutely think your question's really important, and it has to be considered if you're sort of going into a forest and putting something in there. A lot of trials were done to make sure that we were going to install something in any location that left no trace and caused no harm, for sure.
Thank you, that was a really good question. Did you get any feedback from people about their experience? Did it help them feel more of a connection to nature? And that's from Sheila Lester.
So the feedback so far has been the way in which having both sound and visuals have provided this alternative experience of being in the forest, and that the combination, they sort of really complement and aid each other. So without the soundscape, the visuals might just be like an extra thing to see in the forest, but when you've got both of them, whether you're with your headphones and on your own listening journey, or if it's being played with out of speakers, so you're able to hear the landscape and the sound, that it provides this alternative way to know and experience the forest. I had another point on that and I've completely forgotten it.
We have a comment from Rachel Jones who says, thanks for that brilliant talk, Liz.
Thank you.
Okay, so if there aren't any more questions, we'll move on to Noora's presentation, but please feel free to ask more questions in the chat, and we'll be doing the rest of the questions at the end of the event. So Noora, if you'd like to go ahead, that would be awesome.
Okay. You can hear me okay?
Perfect.
Cool. Okay. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Just a second. Okay. And and yeah, feel free again to say if there's something that is not looking okay, or I'm saying something funny you can't understand. Yeah, I'm Noora, and really happy to be here today, and also, like Liz says, very happy to hear all these other artist talks also. And first of all, I might just kind of position myself a little bit. I'm living in Helsinki in Finland, and I'm working as an artist and art educator. And yeah, I'm sort of living partly in Helsinki in the more urban setting, but still near to the forest. But then I have another place where I also live, where we have like a home garden. And most of my projects that I'm gonna be talking today, they are made in that home garden. And the perspective that I'm talking from is it's based on my own artistic practice, and I consider it as constant research. So of course, I'm all the time listening to others talk and reading a lot. And like Liz, I have also been reading Jane Bennett, who also have a new book, by the way, if you haven't seen it. It's called Influx and Efflux, where she talks more together with the poets like Thoreau and Whitman. Very nice reading. I can recommend it. And another theoretical base for me is I've been reading Tim Ingold. And then also I have another paper that actually I might show it now so that I don't forget. Just to give you some reading, because I think part of this talk might be, you know, that people want to study this this area of new materialism, which is a complex area, but super interesting. So this is just, I think you can see this article, something that I ran into not long time ago, Cultural Studies Review, and it just came to my, it has a lot of very good essays, and like Melanie talked quite fast, a very huge ideas that this new materialism has. And here I think is it's something that also touches me, that this is about seeking to reclaim the indispensable and transforming involvement of materialities in everything from political economy to everyday life, and the constitution of gender, race, and sexuality, and how to engage with the ways in which materialities matter in the formation of lives, the world, and research. The concept also signals an effort to remap how matter is always in formation by drawing on marginal philosophical traditions. Yep. So going back to my presentation, I just wanted to show that so that I don't forget. Yeah, my background is also in social sciences. So I have been just almost made an MA in social psychology, and I did it in Helsinki University. And this was a while ago that I was studying there. And at that time, it's quite interesting to think now that the concept of social, it was like completely human-centered. But at least there was a talk about how identity is built from the connectedness with our surroundings and within relations with others. So now looking back, I think it's very natural that I'm interested in this new materialism at all, because this is sort of like a widening of the field of the whole social sciences, and it still has to do with ideas of equity, which I made almost my master's in, yeah, almost finished it. So now I think I'm gonna talk a little bit about my my artistic practice, and it starts with a small like an intro, how everything started. And I will try to incorporate some of the important terms that I found from new materialism into like kind of showing how I have been trying to put the concepts into practice, because I think that's the meaning of, you know, you should try to make them verbs and not just thinking, but also being close to practical and concrete. Like Donna Haraway is talking a lot about the concreteness of actions. So while having this image here, which is not so, it's about blurriness, but I think like also before I started my photographic regrounding with the photography sort of practice, I had this course that was about learning how to work in a processual manner. And within that course, during that time, I had been working a lot while also studying, and I was really exhausted. My eyes were like totally over energetic. Like when I tried to go to sleep, they wouldn't listen to the gravity and they wouldn't just stay closed, and I couldn't relax. So I think this exhaustion and this kind of like body that was overflowing of the images and tired eyes, it just it made me think about my relationship to photography in general. And because I had this course and I had to produce something, I came up with the idea of trying to work with the smallest gesture that was possible and trying to work with things that are close to you. So I decided to make this score, like a performative score to myself, that for some months, I would commit myself to sitting for 10 minutes in front of my window and with empty paper on my lap and a pen, and then keep my eyes closed because I was tired. And I thought that, okay, this is something that I can do. And I kept on doing this for something like a couple of months. And I just wanted to share what I learned from that practice. It taught me a lot about, first of all, the experience of time and the primacy of experience, really, and how 10 minutes can feel like forever. And also it taught me about commitment to practice. Like, what does it mean to repeatedly do something? And what does it mean when the practice is something that is kind of like piling up, and what can you build from that? So the repetition and the duration they were important to me. And I think also because one part of the score was that, okay, I'm not gonna try to come up with anything special. This kind of like non-goal orientedness and this kind of uselessness of the whole idea, later on they just totally make sense to me, because one part of the I think the idea of sustainability has to do with working against productivism, which is like a very important coding that everyone have. And it has to do with the masses of photography and the whole aesthetics of photography and artisthood. So this productivistic mode of being became something that I have been wanting to trying to go against a little bit and slowing down. But I think when I was sitting with this paper and moving my pen, this non-happening, it made some space for me to all of a sudden start listening to my own breathing and realizing that I am exchanging something through breathing all the time with the atmospheric thing, this inside home air. And this breathing, I mean, it's the way how we immerse and it's the place where we exchange things. And so this circular movement and how the breathing is changing all the time, and it's affected by how I am feeling. So I think it made some space for me to listen to this. And also I noticed, okay, the humming of the refrigerator and the water moving in the pipes in the construction of this building. So these other forces that were surrounding me and making my life possible, enabling my life, became visible. And this was just because of, so I think like a nice example of how this non-goal oriented way can give space to other things to come front. And at this time, I didn't have any idea what is new materialism and anything like that. But it just gave me an idea of that I'm not at home alone, and there is no silence, and everything. This is a holistic happening, this life that we live in, and things. And I am completely dependent on other things, my whole survival. So now I can go to this. I will keep on talking while moving with these images. So there was another happening also. This was around 2015. I had had my first garden in my life for about quite a long time, and this powerful place of gatherings, I had lost it. And then we had another home garden that kind of came to my life kind of suddenly, and I felt like what is this place and what is my position in this place? And I started to think that, okay, I have to form a relationship to this garden place and everything around this place. And at this one summer, I think a lot of things kind of came together in a right way. And also I found a box of old photographic papers that used to belong to my father, and because they were outdated, they were older than me, they were unpredictable, non-usable rubbish. Now they were kind of free from all the expectations. This wild, interesting waste material that I found became some kind of like a grounding place for me to work again my relationship to photography in general. And I started, with this other practice as a base, I started this series called Dialogues, and then it always has in the name the date and the time. And I made again this score that I will be sitting for 30 minutes just with this paper, always outside and always without the deadline, and just keep breathing to the paper. And this paper kind of, it became a place or a space, I think, where I could be also working with the ideas of hospitality. Like, what is this paper place? It's something that the current weather can come and my fluids will be running and we are going to be sharing chemistry. And suddenly I started thinking, yeah, well, actually this sharing of chemistry, it's a very bodily thing, and there is a lot of analogs with me and this photographic paper. I mean, my skin is also sensing the sun, and my sweat is gonna be recorded in the paper, which is very sensitive to all the touches, just like my skin. And just thinking about these analogs between my body and the body of a photograph, it still is an important practice for me. So I think like this work has been, it's called Fluid Being, and now it's a multi media collection, or actually a family of art pieces and art processes, and it's growing. And really, it's not a project. It doesn't have a like specific starting point, or also no end. And I think that this this photographic space, and thinking about this hospitability, it makes you wonder about how we do photographs in general, and what does it mean actually? What has it meant when people started to see the world as an image? Like long time ago, when around the times like when the Industrial Revolution started, and the originally natural and wild photograph was tamed, and we learned how to fix it and how to make it something static. So I think for me, these images, of course you can't read the whole process from these images, but the process of making this, it's teaching me about the liveliness of photograph. And in New Materialism, there is the idea of like resensitizing yourself to all materialities around you. So I think this is the kind of practice that I'm doing here. It's about building up spaciousness, so that others, little crickets or raindrops or snow, everything can come to my space and the photographic space and start mattering. So yeah, when this Industrial Revolution started, and photography along with it, as a tool for people to be used as we want, to serve for us in the science making and everything, I just noticed that around the same times, wasn't it then that the fossil subject also was born? The subject that we are all now completely dependent on the fossil fuels. And so that's why I think it's important to think about what does it mean, this subjecthood. And when you immerse in a space, you kind of give out something. You make space in your subjecthood for others to come in, and that's when I think like this co-constitution and becoming together can start happening. So this whole process has been kind of like, if I think about Donna Haraway, she's talking about making kin and this kinship, because yeah, I think like with the kinship, of course, accountability can happen, right? She says that if you become kin with, for example, a forest nearby you, then you have the forest, but also the forest has you. And I think an important thing here is that making kin is time-consuming process. And photography has always been about speediness, of saving time and doing things fast, and kind of making fast definitions also about what things are. So this slowing down of the whole process and dwelling in a photograph, and thinking about how you relate to the photograph, and what is actually the co-evolution of a modern fossil subject and a photograph. And what about, like, if I start thinking about this waste material photograph as a wild material that has its own will also. Yeah. So in New Materialism, there's the idea of not treating other things, other materialities around us as objects, but things. And thing is something that is verb, like a verb-like liveliness, but that is able to contribute to this co-forming and co-composition of different happenings, which is always like a situated thing. But I think like Tim Ingold is talking very nicely about, you know, how to observe, for example, how the kite gets its kiteness only when it's working together with the wind. So then you can see how they together in this gathering, that's when the agencies of things are coming. So the agency is not in something that is incorporated in one separate thing, but everything is related and things happen in gatherings. So I think these photographs, you can think about these as gatherings where things happen or don't happen. Sometimes the photographic paper don't want to collaborate and there is no trace, but of course it's not an empty process for me still. And still, like, even if there is no photographic trace, there is the leaking of the whole situation to me and me leaking to the situation. And so I think the one part of the sustainability of practice is actually this notion of practice, that you continue with something that you're committed to, and that also you see the relationhood that is always there. Okay, I don't know how long time I still have, but
you're coming up to about 20 minutes, but
okay. Yeah, I'll speed up a little bit. So anyway, in the garden there is of course there is a compost, and compost is something that makes us think about consumption. It makes us think about food. It makes us reconsider what we mean by waste and what is the potentiality of the waste and what is this whole material circulation that we are part in. And of course, with the photograph, it's always interesting to think about also this dirt and cleanliness that we so much want from the photograph. So here I have been putting these old photographs, photographic papers to the compost, and they might be there for a couple weeks or something. And I think it's quite nice when the microbes can start living on it. And I'm thinking, well, what kind of a growing ground is a photograph? What is it cultivate? What am I cultivating as an artist here? And what is this shared space? But at least it gives me a lot to think about diversity and this melting of the boundaries, like the ultimate giving up of a singular and the idea of singular identity. And this is really about closeness and touching and living together. And of course, I mean, my body is full of microbes that are totally unknown agents to me. So I can also research those with my artistic work. And sometimes when I'm thinking about exhibiting photographs, and when we are talking about the liveliness of the material and the surprising happenings that can happen when you work with a live matter, I could show these ephemeral installations where compost matter and photographic paper are interacting, and sometimes new life is born. And it's quite interesting to see how first it can be quite beautiful, but then at the end the whole think about the whole idea of beauty become also something to be thought. Gonna skip a little bit. Here's just a maybe like an ending picture. So I think like before we learned how to fix the photograph, I mean, if as a natural photographic happening, it's something that happens in its own time. It's coming and going, and we don't have any control of it. And usually when I have been doing these cameraless, the breathing image or the compost images, I have not even tried to fix them. So the originals have stayed alive, and I have just scanned them. And it has been important to me to keep the originals in a living state and not trying to stock them. But with the summer residency with Melanie, we experimented with a lot of things, and we tried to resolve a lot of toxic things in a photographic process. And I tried to fix this image with urine, and it was, I have to say, it was a lot more comfortable than working with chemicals. I have been a little bit scared of those, and this kind of way of connecting your own body with the photographic body, it just it's something to be contemplated with, because it serves as a metaphor also to all your other relations. And as I said in the beginning, I consider this what does it mean, this sustainability with photography? I think photography is something that I am coded in. It is running in my veins, and the whole society is pretty much organized with a lot of processes that are involved with photography as a mediating factor. So many of our relations to the world are somehow related to photography. So I think it's inseparable. It is even if I don't make any photographs, I am still living with the photographs, and I'm photographic. So, which is why I would suggest, instead of thinking about only sustainability of photograph, to try to come up with a practice that makes practice that will leak to all aspects of your life, so that your whole life will become like an experimental, but also testing ground of like more sustainable living. Because I think everyday life is what keeps piling up. So it matters, art and life are together, and you cannot separate them. So to create a practice that will all the time form you as a person, and as a co-worker and colleague, and as a co-maker to everything, is what matters. Okay, sorry, I think I took too much time. Yeah,
that was wonderful, Noora. Thank you so much. We'll move straight on to Karel now, and then we'll move on to my presentation after that. And then we'll take all the rest of the questions at the end.
Okay, thanks, Melanie. Yeah, thank you for curating this, because after listening to Liz and Noora, I can see that there are kind of different points of connection. Yeah, and that this will be enriching to kind of have this series of events, a series of talks. I'm now kind of worried. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. Okay, so I share my screen. All right, there we go. So what I'm going to do is, I have two citations, one from Donna Haraway's book, Staying with the Trouble, and one from Jane Bennett's book, Vibrant Matter. So both of these authors we, of course, already have passed. And I'm going to try to create a sort of dialogue between my work and these two citations that I have picked, to sort of show you how I understand their thinking. Because I think that this is important, that we all kind of, when we do this kind of reading, that we understand it in different ways. So that it's important to kind of show that and talk about it, so that yeah, you can find those points of contact and see where you share something and where you might differ. So that creates a new dialogue in a way. So the first citation is, wait a sec. How can I lost my cursor. No, that's not what I want to do. Wait a second. Okay. Okay, so there we go. So the first citation is, in urgent times, many of us are tempted to address trouble in terms of making an imagined future safe, of stopping something from happening that looms in the future, of clearing away the present and the past in order to make futures for coming generations. Staying with the trouble does not require such a relationship to times called the future. In fact, staying with the trouble requires learning to be truly present, not as a vanishing pivot, but between awful or Edenic pasts and apocalyptic or salvific futures, but as mortal critters entwined in myriad unfinished configurations of places, times, matters, meanings. It matters what thoughts think thoughts. It matters what knowledges know knowledges. It matters what relations relate relations. It matters what worlds worlds. It matters what stories tell stories. So this second part is a little bit further in the book. And then so my citation from Jane Bennett is that I want to focus on. The political goal of vital materialism is not a perfect equality of actants, but a polity with more channels of communication between members. There are many practical and conceptual obstacles here. How can communication proceed when many members are non-linguistic? Can we theorize more closely the various forms of such communicative energies? How can humans learn to hear or enhance our receptivity for propositions not expressed in words? How to translate between them? What kind of institutions and rituals of democracy would be appropriate? And then further, in a world of lively matter, we see that biochemical and biochemical social systems can sometimes unexpectedly bifurcate or choose developmental paths that could not have been foreseen, for they are governed by an emergence rather than a linear or deterministic causality. And once we see this, we will need an alternative both to the idea of nature as a purposive, harmonious process and to the idea of nature as a blind mechanism. Give up the futile attempt to disentangle the human from the non-human. Seek instead to engage more civilly, strategically, and subtly with the non-humans in the assemblages in which you too participate. So to go back to Donna Haraway, and kind of that will be my first kind of line of inquiry, and to kind of sum it up more concise. So the kind of central notion is here, it matters what stories tell stories. So my story is very much connected to ideas of being independent, taking things in your own hands, the idea of do it yourself, and also very much to the idea of community and collaboration. And of course, we talk about these non-human entities, but I think it's equally important kind of, you can only do that when you also have a community of humans. You can't do it alone. And so this picture is taken in about 1988 when I was part of a squad that was in the process of being legalized. And I lived in a little house in the back of the garden. which was actually a sort of stable storage house. And with the rest of the community and the help of some friends, we started to renovate that house. And so this is the result, kind of when it was sort of close to being finished. And so what you see on the left side was a studio, and I lived upstairs, and through the kind of main doors, you came into a kitchen, and that was also an office at the same time. And in the rest of the house, on the ground floor to the back, Janneke, this was in the Netherlands, by the way. Janneke, who is a painter, who is still very much active as a painter, she was living there. So I started a little laboratory specialized in Super 8 film, because that was very much my passion. And so you can see here the flyer on one side, and on the other side the editing little editing studio that we made. That's to just give you a short sample of the kind of films that came out of this workshop. So this is a couple of years forward. This is a picture taken in 1996. The fact of the matter was that very quickly the Super 8 workshop became a sort of place of a sort of international gathering, because we could make prints from Super 8 films from the original. We could make a copy, and there was a huge demand for that, because the sort of commercial industry, which was very much based on the need of amateur filmmakers, was breaking down. So all the laboratories were closing. And out of that international community grew this group. And maybe you can recognize on the back what is now the Museum of the Docklands. So this was while the Canary Wharf, if you know London, was already built. But most of the buildings that you can now see in this area were not there. And this building, where it's now the Museum of the Docklands, was completely empty. And my friend Greg, who you can see in the middle, was the curly hair. He managed to get that building to do a sort of temporary exhibition / series of performances. And in the picture you see like a lot of like-minded artists from the Netherlands, from France, from the UK. And this is actually not in that same building, but in an artist initiative in Den Bosch. But this is kind of very much shows kind of the type of performances that we did. The very collaborative, improvisational, and kind of working with different types of moving images, created live and also projected. 60mm film, but also live video feeds, making sounds, producing sounds, making music, electronic music. So it was a sort of clash of all kind of different media. So again, a couple of years forward, I started working with the film archive in Amsterdam. And yeah, I was very interested in the actual practice of film archivists. And so I asked them if they could let me work with a film from their collection that was literally falling apart and that was on the brink of extinction, you could say. And so they came up with this film, and you can see that the image has almost disappeared. And so I made first I made a little video about the actual conservation of the film itself. And then I started working with the actual material, very much kind of focusing on these deterioration effects, because that was what interested me. And the kind of the connection here to a sort of environmental idea is that this film was shot on nitrate, and nitrate is based on cotton. So the plastic is much more kind of this type of plastic is much more susceptible to sort of microorganisms that live on top of the, not only in the film emulsion, but also in the base of the film itself. So those kind of effects are the effects that you see in this little excerpt. And so this photo was taken in 2010. I was very interested in the maroon communities in Suriname. Suriname is a former Dutch colony. And the Maroons are kind of the slaves that revolted against their masters and set up their own communities and their own society in the rainforest, far away from the plantations. And this was a practice that it's not only found in Suriname, but also in French Guiana and in Jamaica. In most other kind of countries like Brazil, these Maroon communities have merged again with the kind of larger society. So they don't exist independently anymore. But in Suriname, they do. And the very interesting thing about this particular village was that they were setting up their own museum to preserve their own culture. And it's this group of men who started this initiative. And so I was able to make contact with them and start a collaboration with them. And as you can see, they are again inspired by Rastafari culture. So I was able to take a film from the Amsterdam Film Archive that was filmed in the same area and record a soundtrack together with the people who live there now.
Well, we're not take Tawakasono, Nabita Hibidai, Homofita, tea, no tea, Kunosi, Kifita, tea, for that, Kinosi, Kifiata, some. Jedi, but you Vinango a photo Kuru. No, it's a Tavita, Mutaya, Auduliba. No, Tafukura. No, Tafukurati, Kumuka, Photo Tapu. No, Tapu Butu, Tatu Sikura, Taku. Sembeda, Gugubutu, Sembeda, Hidibutu, Kura. Tahai data, Taku. Te Undu. Didn't the Kai Mada, Otapula in a two, Cha Hidibuta, Daliba. No, high. Wapachi, Otapula, two. No, Chalai, Buta, Atariba. No, high Dibutu, Sakabuto, Kyokaba, to Atariba. No, to Nalai Kyokaba. No, Sugabuto. No, Poo. Te Untawa, and the Pulai. No, Tasub, no, Tahaye. Kumuta, Abutu Jindu. No, high. Kyokaba to Atariba. No, Sugabuto. No, to Nachi, Pada, Tekura. Te Kaunangu.
Yeah, there's a lot more to tell about these projects, but I just move on to give you a sort of idea of my work in dialogue with these citations. So the second citation that I already mentioned is by Jane Bennett. And so the key idea here for me is seek instead to engage more civilly, strategically, and subtly with the non-humans in the assemblages in which you too participate. And then, yeah, I get to this well-known process.
You're breaking up a little bit there, Karel.
I'm breaking. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm referring to Kefenol, which is quite a well-known process now that is quite popular in the artist community. So coffee-based developer. And I started using that because I was very interested in, as Noora and Liz and Melanie, in making photographic practice, and in my case, cinematographic practice, more sustainable, less toxic. And one of the early experiments that I did was I submerged a very old 35mm film that somebody gave to me in salt and let it dry on top of the film. And then I developed at the moment that you project it in this image. And this was part of an exhibition that I did in a small gallery run by a friend of mine in Bonn in Germany. After that, I try to find further ways to sort of experiment with other ways to make images directly on photographic emulsion. So in fact, like Noora was showing the camera-less photography, I was experimenting on motion picture film to make camera-less images that could be set in motion. And I figured out that I could use the plants to make images directly on photographic emulsion. And I have called that that technique the Phytogram. So you basically soak the plant in a solution with vitamin C and soda. And like you see here, you place the plant on top of the film, and it will leave a trace. Also, again, kind of similar to what Noora was showing us. But because there's between the phenols in the plant and the photographic emulsion. The difference is that I do fix my images. Basically, mainly because otherwise it's, I love to project the film itself, and without fixing the image, that is basically impossible to do. Here's another example. This is a petal from a big rose. And here's a sort of time-lapse image made with ground elder leaves that I made this composition, and then because the leaves in the middle have been longer sort of exposed, you could say, to the photographic paper, they get a different grade than the leaves at the sides. So there's a temporality also to this image. Here one more example, more chaotic, more organic, maybe you could say, and a sort of combination of lots of different species, mostly plants that we consider weeds. And also some work on motion picture film and I got also very fascinated with the film strips themselves. So I started making installations with the film strip. So not projecting them, but suspending them on little wires in space. And a very important part of this also for me is giving workshops, sharing this technique with others. And this has been a really incredible journey because a lot of people are really interested. So I've been giving sort of workshop in all kind of different physical spaces. This one is at the art school in Bourges in France. And lately, since the lockdown, I've been giving quite some online workshops as well, which is really interesting because it still connects to a sort of material practice, and so the online part is just a sort of sharing part. And I know that people will actually engage with materials and with the plants that are directly surrounding them. Yeah, this is one more picture from a workshop, in this case at Glacier Park here in the UK. And then the lockdown hit me as it hit everybody else. And I'm also very fortunate to have a garden. And Melanie already showed the book by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She talks extensively about the Three Sisters, which is basically a way to plant different vegetables together. In this case, corn, beans, and pumpkin. So that's one of the things I did the moment that I realized that I would have to spend a lot of time at home, and I would have much more time to work in the garden. And it was fantastic to see these plants growing and to go out there every day, and also to see how they sort of work together and entangled with each other. And also at some point, actually later than this, they also could be nasty to each other. The beans would sort of tear down the maize because it got so strong that it got too heavy, and it literally pulled down the other plants. The other thing I did was build a little darkroom in a shed which was basically empty, and put some solar panels on the roof so that I could also work with some equipment that needs electricity. Because the sort of direct reason for this was that I didn't have access to the darkroom in London where I was usually working. So I had to come up with an alternative. And of course, like working in the garden was already very much part of my practice, working with plants. So this was a sort of natural step to do this. So some pictures of the interior. And this is one of the things that came out of both the garden and the darkroom. And I think what is really important here to mention is that that Jane Bennett's book is called Vibrant Matter, and this is also about vibration. Kind of what I learned working with plants and motion picture film is that the results that I get are actually extremely lively, kind of extremely fast, and often chaotic as well. And some people find that quite confusing because they think about plants as something static and still, as something that they would meditate and sort of contemplate, like the stillness of the plant. And then there's this kind of image, when I come up with that, they are rather confused. But to me it really makes sense, because also the moment that I walk out into my garden and I kind of see, try to really forge a sort of relationships to these plants, the vibration is very much part of their being as well as mine. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Karel. That was amazing. We've got some questions already, but I'll ask them at the end. So I'm Melanie King, and I'm one of the co-directors of the London Alternative Photography Collective. And I'm going to be talking today a bit about my research, which is called Ancient Light Rematerializing the Astronomical Image. So my research question is, how can the field of astronomical photography, viewed through the lens of new materialism, alter our collective perception of ecology? And how can the entanglement of astronomy, materiality, and thingness alter our perception of the status of the photograph? So I'm just going to share some images from the project that I've been working on. So this is Ancient Light is a series of silver gelatin photographs that are taken of the night sky out in the landscape. And I'm particularly interested in this idea of cosmic materiality. So the idea of light traveling for thousands, if not millions of years before reaching photosensitive film. And this has been something that I've been doing for the past 5 years. So going out into the darkness on my own, usually with my camera, and observing the night sky. So the exposures can be anywhere between 30 seconds to 10 minutes. So while the image is being taken, I can observe the night sky. And a lot of what I'm writing about at the moment is that kind of reflective journey of going to these landscapes in the dark and how those environments are affecting me, but also this idea of movement within the landscape, so walking, running, swimming, how that can make my mind more receptive to other things. So I really liked what Noora was saying about the self as being almost photographic, the body as being photographic and us being like a recipient of light, which is really exciting. And also in relation to that, I'm particularly interested in artists such as Gary Fabian Miller, Katie Patterson and Lillian Lynn, who all talk about astronomy and materiality and nature as well. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of projects. This is the Pine Island Glacier Anthotype, which was made on a residency at Hoya in Spain, which is a carbon neutral, carbon negative residency. And I've made some spinach anthotypes of the Pine Island Glacier. So the Pine Island Glacier has been melting quite rapidly, and recently, about a year and a half ago, a massive iceberg came off. So I wanted to use NASA photographs and show that rupture points, because I felt it was something that was worth showing. But I didn't want to use processes that were bad for the environment, so I decided to use spinach and mush that up with vodka and then make it into a paste before putting it onto a piece of paper. And I exposed these for about 6 hours. So I've also been working with Hannah Fletcher, who's pioneered the Sustainable Darkroom project. And I mentioned this before in the introduction, but we've been looking at lots of different things like photographic paper and paper usage and water usage and the chemicals that we're using, as well as use of plastic and disposing of fixative in the sink. So we're looking at all of these aspects as a really large group. We've run quite a few residencies, and yeah, we've been looking at every aspect of how to make the darkroom more sustainable. So through this, I've been working on a number of projects, and this is a photograph which was developed using leftover pasta water. And this was particularly inspired by an artist called Andres Pardo, who runs a film lab called Curioso Lab in Mexico. And he was working on a project in particular which was looking at using food waste, so something that you might usually throw away, and using that as a developer. And he uses analog 60mm film, and I adapted the recipe for 35mm. So this is a tree which is right next to my studio, and you can see that the developer works really well. I've also been making Seaweed Developer, and this is inspired by Julia Emily Parks, who gave a workshop as part of the Sustainable Darkroom last month. And I walked along in my home at the time of Margate and was walking around looking in the landscape, and eventually found some seaweed to work with. And I was really excited about the idea of locality and working with materials that are nearby. So instead of ordering chemicals and them having a really big carbon footprint, that idea of using something which is really from your immediate surroundings. And I'm also writing quite a bit about slowness within my research. So that idea of slowing down and not worrying about being really productive, and also being inspired by that idea of the slow food movement, which is using local recipes and traditional recipes from the area. So that's something that's been really exciting over the past couple of years. So I also participated in a residency at Lay of the Land, which was in West Cork on the southernmost point of Ireland. And I worked with 6 different artists over a period of 1 month. And our brief for the residency was to work together in a true collaboration and make works that are responsive to the landscape. And we made I think it's about 7 different works, but I'm just showing 2 of them. So this is the sea cyanotype. So we're using I think it was 3 dust sheets because we had to find material that we could find in the local area. And we used sea spaghetti to make the shadow, and then we exposed it to the sunlight before washing it out in the sea. And you can see that over the period of time of the cyanotype being hung on the cliff, it started to oxidize at the bottom. This is another piece that we made all together. So this is an 130-meter long print, which was made directly onto the grass. And we're basically blocking the light for 3 weeks. And then for the exhibition at the end of the residency, we allowed people to walk up and down the length of the grass, in particular to show the distance that the miners would have had to go underground to extract copper and things like that from the landscape. So someone who has been really important for me, actually for about 12 years, is Helen Chadwick. She really inspired my work. And one of the things that really inspired me was this piece of work, which is called Viral Landscapes. And she is thinking here about the human as a virus in the landscape, actually. And she's used images of viruses at the time, plus paint, which was put into the ocean and then put directly onto the photographic print. So this is a combination of waves and paint on the photographic surface, and then she used a very early version of Photoshop to superimpose the viruses on the top of the image. And I'm particularly interested in her because of what she wrote. I went to see her archive at the Henry Moore Institute in Leeds when I was doing my bachelor's degree. And she talks a lot about how we're not separate from nature. And she was also talking a lot about the fuzziness of an atom. So within my research at the moment, I'm looking at interconnectedness with humans and non-humans on a kind of cosmic level, but also on a very small scale. So when Timothy Morton here is talking about our relationship to the microbiome and the viruses and things that live on us, that really makes me think about where you draw the line between the human and the non-human. So I won't be necessarily reading out all of these quotes, but I'm happy to send them out afterwards. Again, looking at this idea of materiality and our interconnectedness with nature on a cosmic scale, I'm really interested in the idea of us being made out of star stuff. So it's not just us that is made out of star stuff, it's also photographic materials. The silver that I'm using within my film is also something that's been made possibly within giant supernova. And I find that the things like the calcium in our teeth and the iron in our blood is also something that is made within the stars. So one other project that I just wanted to mention is this project called Meteotype, which is something I made in 2016. And I milled meteorite dust with the Royal School of Mines. So I got a meteorite and I smashed it basically, and then I squished it into some ink and then made a photographic etching of the meteorite itself. So this is an example of one way of working with cosmic materiality. So I just wanted to show a few texts. I probably will read these out, but I'll share them. So within the Vibrant Matter text, Bennett wishes to highlight the extent to which human being and thinghood overlap, the extent to which the us and the it slip-slide into each other. The hope is that the story will enhance receptivity to the impersonal life that surrounds us and infuses us, will generate a more subtle awareness of the complicated web of dissonant connections between bodies, and will enable wiser interventions into that ecology. So from my perspective as an artist, the study of materiality helps us to respect materials, where they come from, where they go for our own sake. So within, I think it's page 6 of Vibrant Matter, Jane Bennett talks about this piece by Robert Sullivan, where he makes this really interesting observation of pollution happening within a landscape. And for me, that passage reminds us that there's a vital materiality that can never really be thrown away. Bennett says that trash continues its activities even as a discarded or unwanted commodity. Thing power is the curious ability of inanimate things to animate, to act, or to produce effects. So going back to this idea of sustainable photographs, when we're working with photography, the chemicals that we're using, they're never thrown away. They are somewhere in the landscape, and that's really something that is important to think about. So she says about vital materiality, that such a newfound attentiveness to matter and its powers will not solve the problem of human exploitation or oppression, but it can inspire a greater sense of the extent to which all bodies are kin, in the sense of inextricably enmeshed into a dense network of relations. And in a knotted world of vibrant matter, to harm one section of the web may very well to be harm oneself. So just to end this part of Vibrant Matter, Jane Bennett says, vital materialists will thus try to linger in those moments during which they find themselves fascinated by objects, taking them as clues to the material vitality that they share with them. This sense of strange and incomplete commonality with the outside may induce vital materialists to treat non-humans, animals, plants, earth, even artifacts and commodities more carefully, more strategically, and more ecologically. So another text that I'm also looking at, I actually have a chapter where I put Barrage and Bennett in dialogue, is Meeting the Universe Halfway, which is looking at the relationship between quantum physics and the language that we use in quantum physics, which is incredibly interesting, and it's a very big text with lots of important points to take away. But for me, I'm particularly interested in this idea of being entangled on a quite profound level with other non-human beings in the landscape. And this idea of not being disconnected, but completely connected to the rest of the world. So she says, to be entangled is not simply to be entwined with another, as in the joining of separate entities, but to lack an independent, self-contained existence. Existence is not an individual affair. And she also talks about our apparatuses as not being separate from us, which is incredibly fascinating to think about in terms of working with telescopes and cameras. They are also made of materials that are found within the land, whether that is a digital or an analog camera. So there's quite a section in my thesis which is also about digital technology and where those materials come from to make those cameras. So in the face of ecological catastrophe, I think it's important to have hope. So I've just pulled this image off the internet today, which is of the dreadful, dreadful fires that are happening in California. So for me, I find all of this this catastrophe really hard to deal with, and I'm sure that's the same with everybody else. But I do also think that it's important to find hope. So the conclusion of my thesis is particularly about hope. So I'm just going to share with you to end a couple of passages from Inspiring Theorists. And this is one from Rebecca Solnit, whose book is called Hope in the Dark. It is important to say what hope is not the belief that everything was, is, or will be fine. The evidence is all around us of tremendous suffering and tremendous destruction. The hope I am interested in is about broad perspectives with specific possibilities, ones that invite or demand that we act. It is also not a sunny everything is getting better narrative, though it may be a counter to the everything is getting worse narrative. And she says, political awareness without activism means looking at the devastation you're faced towards the centre of things. Activism itself can generate hope, because it already constitutes an alternative and turns away from the corruption at the centre, to face the wild possibilities and the heroes at the edges are at the side. So Solnit's call for activism in the face of darkness chimes with Haraway's notion of staying with the trouble. In response to the gravity of these ecological issues, Haraway warns against two possible reactions. One of these feelings could be a dangerous amount of faith in the possibility that technology could save us from catastrophe, and another response is that of nihilism. And she says, namely, a position that the game is over, it's too late, there's no sense trying to make anything better, or at least having an active trust in each other, working and playing for a resurgent world. And this is actually a point that Karel made, I think, earlier, but I think it's really exciting. So our task is to make trouble, to stir up potent responses to devastating events, as well as settling troubled waters and rebuilding quiet places in urgent times. Many of us are attempted to address trouble in terms of making an imagined future safe, of stopping something from happening that looms in the future, of clearing away the present and past in order to make future for coming generations. Staying with the trouble does not require such a relationship to times called the future. In fact, staying with the trouble requires learning to be truly present, not as a vanishing point between awful orogenic pasts and apocalyptic futures, but as mortal critters entwined in myriad unfinished configurations of places, times, matters, and meanings. And just to end, I wanted to include a passage from Robert Macfarlane from his book Underland, and he refers to the idea of the Anthropocene, but he talks about the problems with that term of the Anthropocene, but he also talks about its usefulness. So perhaps above all, the Anthropocene compels us to think forwards in deep time and to weigh what we will leave behind. As the landscapes we are making now will sink into strata, becoming underlands. What is the history of things to come? What will be our future fossils? As we have amplified our ability to shape the world, so we become more responsible for the long afterlives of that shaping. The Anthropocene asks of us the questions memorably being posited by the immunologist Jonas Salk. Are we being good ancestors? So that's the end of my presentation. But the overlying message that I would like to leave you with is this idea of thinking in a range of magnitudes. So astronomical time on the level of millions and millions of years, geological magnitude, and also this idea of the human lifespan.